Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's so nice to see you all here. Thank you for coming out. I'm Angela Evansy. I'm the Interim Senior Vice President of Content here at Vermont Public, and I am thrilled to be here with you tonight to welcome Ayesha Rascoe, the host of NPR's Weekend Edition Sunday and the Saturday host of the podcast Up First. So to work in journalism is to be continually reminded that we cannot predict the future. And we can never know when a story will develop that will deeply and inexorably affect the communities that we cover and that we serve. And I feel like that's never been more true than the past couple years, the past couple months, even the past couple weeks. And as listeners, because we are all listeners, I think it's times like these when we come to most rely on and really cherish the journalists and the hosts that we trust the most for their steadiness and their thoughtfulness, the way they can bring humanity to difficult stories and humor when the time is right. And I think both of the people who are taking the stage tonight really exemplify those qualities. So prior to her role as host at NPR, Ayesha Rascoe was a White House correspondent and covered 3 presidential administrations. Before joining NPR in 2018, she spent the first decade of her career at Reuters, covering some of the biggest energy and environmental stories of the past decade, including the 2010 BP oil spill and the US response to the Fukushima nuclear crisis in 2011. She's a graduate of Howard University with a BA in journalism. And in a career highlight, she made an appearance on Vermont Public's podcast for curious kids, But Why? It was November 2020, and the young listener's question was, why are we still talking about the presidential election? Tonight's conversation will be hosted by Mikaela Lefrak. Mikaela is the host and senior producer, of course, of our show here at Vermont Public, Vermont Edition. Her stories have aired nationally on Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Weekend Edition, Marketplace, The World, and Here and Now. Mikaela is a seasoned local reporter also, and she didn't want me to say this part, but I want you to know that she has won 2 regional Edward R. Murrow Awards and a Public Media Journalists Association award for her work. She's a graduate of Middlebury, and earned her master's in broadcast journalism from BU. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing both of you in conversation. And if you have questions for Ayesha, you'll be able to ask those later in the evening. But for now, please join me in welcoming Ayesha and Mikaela.
All right, we got a crowd.
I know.
You got a crowd.
This is impressive. Like, on a Wednesday night, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I'm so grateful.
Well, Ayesha, I feel so lucky to be in conversation with you tonight. I have been listening to you and learning from you for years. And we have a lot of your professional accomplishments to go through tonight. But I would like to start with young Ayesha. So picture with me, Ayesha Rascoe in Durham, North Carolina, a teen.
Yes.
You were the editor of your high school newspaper in Durham. And I think journalism, it actually involves a lot of things that teens would hate. You got to call people on the phone.
Yeah.
There's constant writing assignments.
Yeah.
What appealed to you about journalism as a young woman?
Well, I mean, I should point out that I was a total nerd. I didn't have a social life, so the newspaper was my social life. Okay, so it wasn't keeping me from doing fun things because I was not a cool teen, and so I was the type of teen that did really enjoy writing, and I enjoyed history and being able to ask questions. And I enjoy like English. I was very good at school. That's what I was good at. So I didn't have much of a social life, but I was very good at school. I got all A's, and I was that sort of person. I got all the awards. So that was my thing that I enjoyed because I was a nerd. But I really, I think the thing that I loved about journalism, even then, was like, it gave me a chance to learn about other people in the school, to write about important issues. Like, our school wasn't it was not a top high school. And actually, like, the state came in and, like, they had to do like an intervention because our test scores were so low. And so I actually remembered interviewing, doing a story on that and interviewing like some of the state team that came in to like help and monitor us. And I got a letter from, like, when I was a teen, one of the people that I interviewed actually sent me a letter and said, thank you so much for being such a good journalist. Like, a lot of people could learn from you. I was a teenager. I still remember this. And it was so nice. So, I could have had, like, boyfriends and stuff, but no, I got a nice letter from a state. I had a nice letter from a state administrator. That's what I got.
That's love. Well, you went on to college at Howard University in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Shout out to Howard.
HU.
And while you were there, you worked at the student newspaper, The Hilltop. And for folks who don't know, this is the oldest Black collegiate newspaper in the country.
Founded by Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, very prestigious paper. You were a writer there. You went on to be the campus editor and then the editor-in-chief.
Yes.
And as the editor of the campus section, the real meat and potatoes of the paper, you were interviewing administrators at the school you were going to.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was, at that time, it was very nerve-wracking because Howard was a school, I love the school, and it has this legacy. But as a journalist, as you know, you have to press and ask hard questions, and we're not PR people, right? Like, we're not there to just write puff pieces. So there were times where I had to do stories, and administrators didn't like the stories that we did. And there was a lot of conflict and pushback, and, and especially as a college student who is you're still getting your voice. We didn't always make the right decisions, I will say that. But, like, you're learning, but you also have a lot of insecurities, and then you're being pressed by people who are much older and more experienced than you, and you're trying to figure out, how do I stand my ground? Like, how do I stand firm in what I believe? And that's really what I had to do and learn so much when I was at Howard and at the Hilltop, was to learn how to stand firm in what I did believe, and to stand firm in, I'm going to report the truth. I'm a journalist. I have certain ethics. I'm going to stand by those, even if I'm getting pushback. And also, being able to say that, no matter what happens, I am able to say, I did this work. I'm proud of it. Like, I can stand for what I did, because that's what you have to do as a journalist. You have to be able to say, when I go to bed at night, I am okay with the decisions that I've made. And that's what I had to learn, when I was in college.
I can imagine that interviewing college administrators would also be very good training for being in a White House press briefing, too.
Yes, because you get a lot of, and going to a historically Black college like Howard, there is a legacy to uphold, and some of it would be like, why do you want to tear us down? You know the struggles that we have. Why do you want to paint us in a bad light? But something that I did come to realize is that, a legacy is not something to coast on. It's something to live up to. And so it doesn't, and if you love something, you will critique it because you want it to be the best that it can be. And love is not just, accepting whatever. It's pushing even institutions that you love to be the best that they can be.
Mm.
Yeah.
Ayesha, you have a new book coming out.
I do.
I see your
and
copy,
look,
dog-eared over there.
Look, I'm not trying to do a commercial, but if you want to do a pre-orders are very important. And they have to, I didn't realize they got these little things. You get 20% off. 20% off. Pre-orders are very important. And so, yes, I got this book coming out, HBCU Made. It's all about, and it has a lot of people in it. But yes, it's a collection of essays about the importance of historically black colleges and universities.
And when you say like people, Oprah
Winfrey is in the book.
Oprah's
yes,
Stacey Abrams.
Yes, Stacey Abrams is in the book. Branford Marsalis, Roy Wood Jr. Lots of people are in the book. It's great.
All right, so HBCU Made, a celebration of the Black college experience. It's this book of personal essays by people who went to HBCUs, yourself included.
Yes.
You wrote the introduction and edited this book. And in it, I want to read one quote from it that I really loved. In your introduction, you write, "At Howard, I didn't have to worry about trying to break into spaces that Black people had been shut out of. That was a relief. It allowed me to focus on what those unburdened by racism generally focus on in college, figuring out who the heck I was." That must have felt so freeing.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell us more about what it felt like to be on campus there.
Yeah, you know, when I went to Howard, like, first of all, I'm from Durham, North Carolina, so D.C. was the big city. And I was really afraid, like my family, they were like, we don't know, Ayesha's really quiet. Is she gonna be able to make it in the mean streets of DC? But I was determined to do it. I just felt like Howard was home to me. Like there was just something about it. And when I got there, I think that it was different for me, like because in high school and stuff like that, there were times when I was going to school in a smaller town than Durham and Oxford, and I was like the first Black girl to be number one in her class, and I would have, parents and all these adults like stopping me and saying, we're rooting for you, because it meant so much in this town that was like 50-50 Black and white, but where Black people were still dealing with the vestiges of Jim Crow. I mean, in 2000, they had segregated homecoming courts. In 2000, this was a town that was very much still feeling what happened with segregation and all these things. And you, as a teenager, are bearing the weight of that, these things that happened way before I was born, and that I didn't cause, but I have to carry it. And then you feel that weight. And then you get to Howard and you see that there are all sorts of Black people who are excelling and doing amazing work, and they're all individuals. And this idea of being compared to the white people, or why are you here? Are you here just because you're Black or anything like that? That's not there. It's just you're here to do the work, and can you do the work? And it's an incredible feeling. And I think like that freedom that I saw over and over from other people in the book is like there's a freedom to just be and to figure out how you're gonna live your life.
So you said something that just stuck out to me, this idea that people might look at you and say, are you here just because you're Black? And that makes me think of the recent Supreme Court decision to gut affirmative action and essentially eliminate race as a factor in college admissions. And some are predicting that decision could lead to an influx of applications into HBCUs. Yeah. And I wonder, from your vantage point, having graduated from one, how did the news of that decision hit for you?
Well, affirmative action, like the thing of it is like even, people in this book, a lot of the people in this book, even though they may have went to an HBCU, a lot of them went to graduate schools that were at predominantly white institutions. And they talk about the difference. Like some of the people in the book talk about going to a predominantly white institution and being accused of plagiarism and being accused of all these things because they felt like someone who looks like you, couldn't do this sort of work. And so I think that, but there is also the fact that HBCUs cannot educate every Black person in this country. Like, they just do not have the resources or the space to do so. And so you have to have places in predominantly white institutions and, in HBCUs where Black people and people of color can feel seen, they can feel heard, they can feel respected. And they need to also be given a shot. And you can look at affirmative action for some of these places as a way that people were given a shot. They were given a shot to be able to show what they can do and what they're able to do. I mean, you look at someone like me, when I went to Howard University, I did go on a full ride. I had, like I said, I was a nerd, so I did really well. I got an academic scholarship. But there were I ended up at Reuters, not because I had the greatest internships. Like everyone else at Reuters at the time when I interned, and this was my first job, was at Reuters. They were all from Harvard or Columbia or some type of Ivy League. They had all interned at every major publication, whether it was Bloomberg, the New York Times, the Washington Post. I had not been able to do that, right? Like, I had interned at the Winston-Salem Journal, and that was it. But I was in a class, Reuters had a business reporting class, a partnership with Howard, and in that class, the teacher, who was a reporter and trainer at Reuters, saw my work and said, "You do good work. I see your work. You should be able to go to Reuters. Like, you should be able to work at Reuters." And he gave me the recommendation that really got me the internship at Reuters that opened the door to my entire career. But if you had just looked on paper, I was not someone who would have gotten chosen for that internship. And I think in so many ways, sometimes when you look on paper, you can say, does this person deserve it? But I was able to do the work. Clearly, I'd have made it. But so it's like, sometimes you have to give people a shot. And sometimes you have to give people a chance to show who they can be. And I mean, that's not really an answer to a policy question, but I think that's an answer to the type of society we want to be, is you gotta give people a shot. But HBCUs are amazing places and amazing institutions and need support to be able to educate the students that do come through their doors.
Well, I really loved reading the book, and I lived very close to Howard for years, and it's such a vibrant campus.
Yes.
It is such a fun place to even be near. It seems like a really wonderful place to go to college.
Oh, thank you. No, it's a lot of fun. I had great years at Howard, and they got a great band, and it's just great parties and great life.
Yeah. Well, as you were alluding to, you certainly did make it in the world of journalism. So let's talk for a moment here about your time as a White House correspondent for NPR. You covered 3 presidential administrations in that role. And when Donald Trump became president, as we all know, a lot of the old traditions of how the White House interacted with the press were thrown out the window. What do you remember from that time?
Wow. I mean, that's a big question because it was going from I covered the last year of the Obama administration, and I covered all of the Trump administration and the first year of the Biden administration. So going from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, it was like going from, you going on a fast train to going on like a roller coaster that maybe hasn't, passed all its inspections. And so it was a lot. Just from the beginning, and there were so many questions about whether Trump was even going to allow the press to stay in the White House, whether he was going to move us out of the briefing area. And there are press offices in the West Wing, whether he was going to get rid of that. It starts off with Sean Spicer doing that impromptu press briefing, saying it was, he had the biggest inauguration ever, and it just went from there. It was just. It just didn't, every day there was something new, there was something different. I had the Twitter alerts on my phone for Trump, and, there were times where it might be 2 in the morning and he would send like 60 tweets and my phone would just be vibrating and vibrating and vibrating. I'm like, what's going on? And he's tweeting about like firemen and unions and all this stuff. I mean, just like all these retweets and stuff. So it was, I think it's still hard to grasp all of the things that were happening because it was a lot.
Yeah. Did you have to change the way you did your job?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody in media had to adjust because it was a very different time. I mean, and I think in some ways it was ways that needed to be done. So, in the past, if a president said he had made a deal with some, auto plant, you could say the president says this, and you could, believe that actually was the case or like some semblance of it. But when Trump was president, you really couldn't just repeat what he said because you didn't know whether it actually had happened, right? You'd have to say, the president says this but doesn't provide evidence. And I mean, I think there are a lot of cases for any president, Trump and otherwise, where you have to say that, or a lawmaker say they said this, but they said it without evidence. And so you had to, so it was just a change in the dynamic and really in the framework of the way that you approach these sorts of stories.
Well, it was so wonderful to hear your voice reporting on these different administrations, providing that continuity throughout all of that change. And in particular, there's this one moment that stood out for me that was from February, I think, of last year, when you got in this back and forth with President Biden's press secretary at the time, Jen Psaki. Yeah. And it was over a raid that had occurred that had resulted in the death of an ISIS leader. Mm-hmm. And you were really pushing her for more information than what she was willing to give at the time. And being part of a briefing like that, I can imagine, involves a mix of preparedness and spontaneity. And I wonder if you could take us back, maybe tell us a little bit more about that moment and why you decided to press then.
Yeah, so this was an ISIS, this was one of the leaders of ISIS at that time had been, killed in a raid by the U.S. This is during the Biden administration. And really, this is an example. We were on Air Force One. I think people had asked a lot of questions at that point about the raid and how things went down. And really, my question was just simple, and it was just like, well, are you going to provide any evidence to back up what you're saying happened in this raid? Because I know, based on NPR reporting and reporting, from lots of other outlets, that there have been times when the U.S. has said something has happened on a raid, and what they say and what actually happened don't always line up. You can call it the fog of war, or you can call it any number of things. But there are times when the official story is questioned. And in this case, there were people that had died. I think his family had died, and they said that had nothing to do with the U.S., that he blew himself up. This happens. But it was just like, are you going to provide any evidence of this? And I really didn't expect that to be a tough question. I thought it was just like, yeah, we will, or whatever we can provide that's not classified, we will. But instead, she got very defensive and was just like, are you going to believe us or ISIS? And I, was like, well, look, it's a fact that the U.S. has not always been forthright about these issues. And that is a fact. Daniel Estrin at NPR did a years-long investigation that, discovered that, in the killing of another ISIS leader, that there had been civilians who were killed, one of them who lost his arm and, is now severely disabled and, didn't seem to have anything to do with what was going on just seemed to be going on a road near where this raid was happening. And they just, the U.S. killed them and severely injured someone. And said they were combatants, but provided no evidence that they were combatants. And now, based on NPR's reporting, there is reason to believe that these were not combatants. These were people who were just, killed and injured. And so based on that, I'm like, no, you should provide evidence. And I think in general, like if you have evidence to back up what you're saying, it only makes everything stronger for the U.S., for our allies, for whoever we work with, for the public to know that they can trust what the government is telling them. And like it's not asking too much. It's just asking you to, to provide evidence so people can trust you.
Well, hearing you talk about this story and the humans at the center, the human toll of war, and brings me back to this moment that we're living through right now, and the enormous human tragedy that is going on in Israel and Palestine. And I don't want to get into the politics of that situation, but I do very much want to hear what it has been like for you and your team to be reporting on this day in and day out. I mean, just reading the news is incredibly heart-wrenching right now. What is it like to be part of it in a way?
I mean, I think that, and I have to say, like for NPR, I think we have a bunch of reporters who are really doing the absolute best that they can do to report on this issue, which is extremely difficult. And so I would say that like what I have done as a host hasn't, you can't really compare to like, Layla Fadel and others who are on the ground, and really Daniel Estrin, who are on the ground and talking to people and really like putting themselves in harm's way and really trying to get these stories of what's happening from Israelis, from Palestinians. I think that with any of these moments, what I try to do is just to be an authentic witness to what is happening. And what my mindset, my prayer is that I will honor everyone who I am speaking about and give them the dignity and the dignity and honor that they deserve, like with my reporting. And so I want to talk about people like I would talk about my loved ones, or would want my loved ones to be spoken about if I lost them tragically. And so that's what I try to bring to every single one of these situations, is like, if this was my loved one, how would I want them to be spoken about? And that's what I try to do. But it is a weight when you're covering things like this, when you're covering shootings. It is a weight, it is heavy, and it's like there's no way to compare to what people are actually going through. So all that I can do, and to sit here and complain or to say, well, it's really hard, it's like, well, I'm reading the news, but I'm not living it. But I do think it's like what I can do is just try to honor the weight of it, to carry the weight of it, and to just try to convey it in the best way that I can. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah. I saw you tweet a week ago about what was coming up on the show the coming Sunday. There were a lot of stories coming out of Gaza at the time, and Twitter or X or whatever it is right now is usually a cesspool of hate. But I saw this one response to your tweet as I was combing through, see what you all were working on. And it was somebody, I just want to read it. It was a guy who said, I hope you guys have counseling at work. I would imagine that learning all of this and talking about it every day could be harmful to your mental health, thinking of you. I thought that was so sweet, for one, and just evidence of the community that public radio creates. But I do wonder, like, how have you and your team, I don't know, I imagine it brings you very close together when you're reporting on things like this.
I mean, it does, and NPR does offer resources for journalists if we need to talk to someone, so we do have those resources. I think that tweet speaks to the kindness of NPR listeners and the way that they, really care for and feel connected to us. So I always appreciate that. I think as a team, what I've always tried to tell everyone who I work with is like, just because we're reporters doesn't mean we're robots. Like, and we are humans and we have feelings. And sometimes you may feel like crying, and if you need to cry, then cry. And if you need to feel something, then feel something. I don't feel like as reporters we have to put ourselves on a shelf and put our humanity on a shelf. We are human beings. I don't try to tell anyone what to think or how to live, but if something is sad, let it be sad. I am not a robot. I will feel it. And then also take time to protect yourself, to protect your well-being. Because if it is hard, and there are days when it's hard, then get help. Go to, talk to somebody. If you need to do that, do that. Because it is a weight that we carry. Like when you're constantly dealing in things that are so negative and so dark. And so don't try to act like you are so strong and you could just take everything. No, you are a human being and you are dealing with some very dark stuff. And so take care of yourself. So that's what I tell, I've cried sometimes when I've talking about stories. I definitely have broken down. Do not lose your humanity. I feel like our humanity is what makes our reporting that much better. I think that's what makes it impactful. Do not lose who you are to talk about things like it doesn't matter. All of this stuff matters, and so bring your whole self with it, and that includes your emotions and your pain and your sadness, and so that's what I always say, but always take care of yourself. Take care of your mental health.
Amen. Whew. It's like Ayesha Rascoe therapy.
No,
I feel like I need to hear that.
You gotta do it.
So, Ayesha, as radio journalists, in many ways, our voices are our currency. It's one of the magical things about public radio. Part of the goal is to speak into the microphone in a way that makes the listener feel like you are talking just to them. You are at their kitchen table. You are their trusted friend. And I think you are just excellent at this. I listen to you, and I trust you, and I also like you and want to go to brunch.
Thank you.
So if you ever want to do that, you let me know. But you've also received a lot of feedback on your voice.
Yeah.
And I am curious what it feels like to have your voice, a thing that is in many ways innate to you,
Yes.
be a part of the conversation at all when people talk about your work. How does that feel?
It's very weird. It's very strange. But it's, until I got into public radio, like I said, before I wasn't in broadcast, I was in print. And so I was, I consider myself to be a writer. And so I never dealt with, in the first 10 years of my career, no one ever talked about how I talked. And so when I got to NPR, I didn't think that my voice would be anything different from anybody else. I didn't think it would stand out. I thought it was just, so when people started reacting to it, I was just like, what? What do you mean? Like, and I am from the South. I'm a Black woman from the South. People can tell that. But my mother had told me that I had lost my Southern accent. So I was like, I don't even have a Southern accent anymore. That's what my mama told me. And so I didn't think that it would be this thing. But, I always say this, I've gotten more positive feedback than negative. So, and I think that's a credit to the NPR audience. And so I should say that. And I always say that. And, but people, it does get people worked up. John McWhorter did a whole podcast on my voice just the other week. 30 minutes with clips of my voice, dissecting my dialect. And that is strange to me. I appreciated his thoughtfulness, but it is weird because it is just me. Like, it's not like I came into the situation saying, I'm gonna shake things up, I'm gonna sound a certain way. I just came in and I just talked like myself. And it's not something that I did intentionally. And so but I appreciate and I recognize that a lot of people do not expect authority to sound like me. They don't expect to hear my voice reporting on Gaza. They don't expect to hear my voice reporting on the president or what have you. And so if my voice expands what people think of when they think of authority, then I am very happy to do that, right? Like, I'm very happy to do that.
If I remember correctly, in your introduction to HBCU Made, you talk a bit about your voice, but in a different way.
Yeah.
About adding some,
adding some bass to your voice.
Yeah,
and it's funny because Honoré Fanon Jeffers says the same thing. You got to put some bass in your voice. Basically, what they were saying was, I was very timid. Can't talk today. I was very timid. But I was being in this leadership position as editor-in-chief, and one of the reporters who actually went on to be very successful and like head of BuzzFeed and head of LA Times, Shani Hilton, she told me, but she was just a senior when I was a junior at Howard, what she said to me, she was like, you should put a little bass in your voice. And what she meant was just like stand in who you are and like use some authority. Like, you know what you're talking about, and don't be so scared and shy when you're talking to people and trying to lead them. Like, just stand in your authority. So put a little bass in your voice. And, at the time I was like, I don't know. And our advisor, Professor Lamb, who's also a great journalist, she said, I agree. I think you could put a little more bass in your voice. Like, basically, like, have more confidence. And it wasn't something that I really took then, but I talk about in the book about how that was something that I had to come into, this idea of like standing in who I am and knowing my worth and knowing that I have something that is worth hearing. And that what I have to say is worth hearing, or as much as anybody else, And so it took time for that to happen. But I say in the book that I hope now everyone can hear me, and I think they do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I love and admire the confidence, but I also want to know when the last time was that you got super nervous ahead of an
I get
interview,
nervous
like
all the time.
Sweaty,
No.
so
I want to be very clear. I get nervous all the time. So when you hear me say I stand in myself, also understand myself is scared 99% of the time. I'm very afraid. I am very anxious, and I have lots of insecurities. I get scared. I get nervous coming up here. I get nervous whenever I'm interviewing someone who I really admire. I interviewed Roxane Gay last week. I was nervous about that. I'm like, oh, am I gonna sound crazy? Like, how is this gonna go? Like, when I interview some big celebrity, I interviewed Idris Elba. I was very nervous about that.
In person?
Like, no, on Zoom. I wish it were in person. Oh my goodness. But it was on Zoom. But yeah, so I was very nervous about that. I get nervous all the time. I'm nervous about this book. I just get nervous. So and when I first started doing, and this was when I was guest hosting It's Been a Minute, I had never done like these very long form interviews, like 30, well, really for It's Been a Minute, it's like an hour interviews that they cut down to 30 minutes. And I interviewed Amelia Clark, and I interviewed, another celebrity whose name is escaping me right now because I'm on the stage. But I was so nervous. Like, I was like sick for like weeks ahead of time. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I've never done it before. Even though I'd like interviewed like presidents and stuff, I don't know. It was just something about doing this more free form interview that was just like, but then, I went to church and they preached about like fears and how, sometimes you're afraid, not just of failure, but you're afraid of success. Because then you have to, once you succeed, then you got to keep succeeding. And then people have expectations for you. And so I had to really deal with that. Like sometimes you're afraid of succeeding because what does that mean? Now you have to prove yourself. And so that's, so I had to deal with that. But yeah, I'm scared all the time. If you see me out somewhere, I'm probably scared. Yes.
What exciting work do you have coming up? What interviews are you really looking forward to?
So I think I'm looking forward to a lot of things. So we are going to see Will Shorts. And next week we're going to visit the Puzzle Master at home. So this is the scoop. And so I'm looking forward to talking to the Puzzle Master at his table tennis club and at home. I think it will be an amazing thing. I think it will be some light in a time when everything is really, really dark. We are hoping to do some more. I had a Civil Rights Generation series where we talk to those known and lesser known people from the Civil Rights Generation. We still want to do more on that. We got to figure out where that's going to go. I really just look forward to whatever work that we can do that seems meaningful and and also I like to do the fun stuff. So, but yeah, those are some of Will Shorts. Puzzle Master at home is something that I'm looking forward to.
Are you going to play him in table tennis?
I am going to play him at table tennis, and I'm not good at it, but yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But
that's some good radio sound.
Yeah, it's some good sound, so it's going to be a lot. So, but yeah, I think that should be fun for at a very, very dark time in this world. So, yeah.
We need it. We need some table tennis.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to the portion of the evening where it is your time to ask questions. We have a microphone over here. If folks would like to come up and ask a question, you can form an orderly line. We're orderly. We're public radio people. And I do have a question, as people think about theirs, that was submitted ahead of the show by it's not a show, it's an event. I'm thinking Vermont Edition. By somebody named Indira, and they ask, what is your best advice for an aspiring journalist? How important is education compared to hands-on experience when just beginning in the field?
I think, I don't think you have to major in journalism. A lot of people don't. I definitely don't think you have to go to graduate school. I didn't go to graduate school, but you can if you want. I think hands-on learning for journalism is essential because a lot of the stuff you can't necessarily learn in a classroom. Like you really have to, be out there knowing what it's like to ask questions and try to get answers and to chase after, lawmakers or to sit at the boring city council meeting for like 3 or 4 hours and figure out what the news is out of it, even though it can be a bit arcane. Some of that stuff you just have to do. But I do think you need a foundation in what, journalistic ethics, and what is acceptable and what's unacceptable. So I think you need to have that foundation on what truth and facts and, how reporting should be done, and no conflicts of interest and things like that. I think all of that is very important. But I don't know that you have to learn that in a classroom. I think you can learn that in the field. But I will say for young journalists, because the journalism industry is changing a lot, definitely learn all the skills that you can. So I didn't take any broadcast classes when I was, coming up. And I wish I had. Learn how to do broadcasts, learn how to talk, even if you're doing print, learn how to write. Because these days, everyone has to do everything. Learn how to produce, learn how to cut tape, learn how to, make a podcast, learn how to do all the stuff. And if some new stuff come up, try that. Because journalism is an industry that is changing very rapidly. And so get all the skills that you can.
Let's have our first question asker. Yes. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Shai, and it's not really a question, but I know you can probably not hear it, but I'm vaguely Southern. I'm from Louisiana. I grew up on a farm in North Louisiana, and the first time myself and one of my best friends heard you on the radio, we like jammed the phone lines because we were calling each other because there was a Black woman who sounded Southern, who sounded like all of our cousins on the radio, and we fight each other all the time because we're like, who are these people who hate the way she sounds? So we were like, I just want to say, and we and I talked about it for like an hour, and then to hear the John McWhorter podcast, we listened to it on the phone together.
Yes. Wow.
Because we were like, what is wrong with everybody?
Yes, yeah.
But we wanted to say that we love you and thank you for inspiring not just, people who are much older than you like I am, but like my nieces, my nephews, my children, and my grandchildren as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
First of all, it is a thrill to be here with you. You're part of our family. We hear you every week. It's just wonderful. Listen, this is more of a suggestion. My native language is French. I grew up in Montreal listening to the BBC in the 1960s and 70s. And I also learned to imitate accents, so let me try.
Okay.
One of the issues with the BBC in the 1960s and 70s, and this had gone back quite a long time, was that they used what was called received pronunciation. Now, received pronunciation was the only way that people on the BBC were allowed to speak. Well, of course, that didn't go over very well with the working class people, who use a lot of diphthongs and glottal stops. I think you are helping to break that damned barrier. So my comment to you, ma'am, is we love you. Be who you are. We're proud that you're on Vermont Public Radio and all of the other ones. So, yes.
Thank you so much.
Well, this is a hard act to follow.
Can you do accents?
Yes, yeah.
I can, but I'm here for a question.
Yeah.
Ayesha, I'm John, and hi. Tell us your most embarrassing moment at NPR
at
or
NPR,
anywhere.
yeah.
If you'd like to.
Yeah, I talked about this earlier. I was in London, and it was like not my first overseas trip for NPR. It might have been my first overseas trip for NPR. And but I was still pretty new. I think it was like in my first year. And sometimes, this is a technical thing, but like sometimes if they do the wiring wrong or the connection wrong, when you're connecting not from a studio, you're on the road, and I was in London when this happened, you can get like a really bad feedback. So basically you'll be talking like this, and then you'll hear yourself like less than a second later screaming back in your ear. And so I had never done radio or broadcast before like that. And so I never had a technical issue on air. And so I'm on air, and I'm doing like Morning Edition, and it's live, and everything had seemed fine. But then as soon as I said hello, I hear myself back, and then after the first question, I really start hearing myself screaming back at myself, and I'm trying to power through it. I don't recommend that. You can't really power through it if you're like hearing screaming in your ears and like as you're talking. And so I couldn't power through it, so I was sounding crazy. I couldn't answer the questions. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. Let me just be quiet and maybe they'll think the line dropped. And so so eventually they were like, okay, I think she's having some issues, and they like stopped and we had to retake it. But I felt horrible. I was so embarrassed. All these people on Twitter were like, are you okay? What's going on? Are you, they thought I had a stroke or something. Like, it was really bad. And I just was so, I was so embarrassed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I sounded crazy. And so I had to learn, I talked to different people like Michelle Martin and others, and they're like, look, if something like that happens, you have to say it, because no one knows, because they can't see you, they don't know what's happening. You have to say I'm getting feedback. And so that's a simple lesson. But yeah, I felt horrible in the moment. Like I was so sad. It's just, there were tears. I was sad. Yes. Hi. Yes.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Welcome back
Yes.
to Vermont.
Yes.
My question is, as you know, I'm a parent of a Black child
Yes.
living in a very predominantly white space. What is your advice for parents like me to instill in our children the value of a HBCU and what it means?
Yeah. You know what? I think that, because I do think that sometimes, like, if a parent is pushing it, they may be like, because when they get to be teenagers, they don't want to hear it. I got a 10-year-old who acts like he don't want to hear it. But I think that part of it is, like, I would say take them to homecomings, because, like, that's, like, if you really want to see the difference in the HBCU, the homecoming is a whole nother thing. I think that's where, and people in this book talk about, they didn't know they wanted to go, but then they went to a homecoming and they saw the step shows and they saw the bands and they saw the food. Like, you get this feeling of all these generations coming together. You see the love, you see the sororities and the fraternities. It's just amazing. Like, it's hard to describe. You really have to live it. But I say take them to homecoming, because there's no party like a homecoming party, and Howard got the best homecomings. That's all I gotta say. And there's celebrities there. I mean, we would have, for Yard Fest, we had, like, the biggest people at the time. Now, this is at the time. This is, like, in the early 2000s. So, like, Nelly was huge. We had Nelly. We had Kanye West, but this was before all of that. He was just starting out then.
And P. Diddy went to Howard for a minute.
Diddy went there. Diddy would always have a big party. So I say take them to homecomings. That's what I recommend.
Hello, Ayesha, I'm Liz, and I'm curious, I have a two-part question. I'm curious in your perspective on artificial intelligence in relation to journalism and broadcasting. And then secondly, I don't know a lot about journalism, I'm an avid listener, but do you design the program, and how did you choose the puzzle? It's a lot of fun, and I'm just interested in how that came to be part of your weekend edition.
Well, I will start first. So I did not choose the puzzle. That was chosen, the puzzle, like, came down from on high. But no, it really started at the beginning of weekend edition. They wanted to do something, the host wanted to have something different and unique. And so they came up with the puzzle. So the puzzle has been there for, like 30 years. Like, it's been there a very, very long time. It's not going anywhere. Everybody loves the puzzle. And so, yeah, people will rise up about the puzzle. And I love it. So when it comes to, so a lot of the structure of what you hear is kind of set, but the stories that we decide to cover are a collaboration between me, the editors, the producers. Everyone has ideas on staff, and we have an executive producer, Sarah Lucy Oliver, and then Evie Stone is the deputy supervising producer and editor. So, they decide kind of like, I decide what stories I'm really interested in, and then we all kind of come together and decide what we want. It's not just me, it's a collaboration. So, but I can, like, say this, I really want to do this, or I really want to do that, and they can try to make it happen. And then I think there is there's a lot of concern about AI. The head of NPR has tried to, put out, NPR has started putting out some, have started putting out some statements about AI and some fundamentals, guidelines that they want to use regarding AI and journalism. I think it is really scary, because I think AI, like all these other things, have built-in biases by the people who create them. I mean, we see this, like, even with the AI drawings, where you ask AI to do a scientist and they show a white man, or what does a professor look like, and they're like, oh, it looks like a white man. And so I think that you have to be very careful, and they're often not accurate. I just think that it is really scary, and I think that journalists have to be very careful about the use of AI. I'm not a scientist, and there's a lot that I don't know, but I think that it's something that has to be regarded with a lot of skepticism and concern. But you have to also be cognizant of the fact that the world is going to continue moving, so you can't just stand still. So I think you have to figure out that balance.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey there.
Hi.
This is sort of a follow-up to that question you just answered. So your Sunday show goes on for a couple hours. What is the level of preparation that requires throughout the week? And what do you do in your downtime?
Oh my goodness. I don't get much downtime. I have 3 kids. And then I work this job, and then I'm doing books and stuff, so I don't get much downtime. But the prep it's 5 days of work. So we're from Wednesday. So my work week is Wednesday through Sunday, and so we're taping a lot of the show ahead of time, and so it takes, and it's a team. We have a team of people, at least 20, 25 people that are putting this show together. So it takes a lot. It takes a lot to get Saturday and Sunday out, to have 2 hours on Sunday and on Saturday. And so my prep is, I have editors, I have producers, I'm reading books, I'm watching documentaries. I got a documentary I really need to read tonight or watch tonight. I was reading a book on the airplane on the way here. So it is a lot. And then I'm trying to read articles and read up on what we're doing. But as a host, you can't know everything. So sometimes you're relying on your producers and you're relying on your editors. And a lot of times you're also just relying on all the work that you did before and just the knowledge that you've gained over the years of reporting. But it's a lot, but it's definitely a team effort. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Yes. Clearly you are a favorite. My question thinking, one of the things I was hoping to hear about tonight as a trusted news source, some office gossip.
Okay.
So at NPR, could you just maybe spill the tea a little bit as far as who of your colleagues is fun to have at a party, tells good stories?
Oh my goodness.
Who do you not want to get stuck in an elevator with?
Oh my goodness.
Things like that.
Oh.
So as safely as you feel comfortable, or as comfortably as you feel. Love to hear something.
I love this question.
Yes, that's a great question. I don't know if I can really answer that. There are lots of people who are, I think, great at a party. Someone who's really funny, she's not with NPR anymore, but Audie Cornish is really funny. She's really great. So she's a lot of fun at a party. Juana Summers is a good friend of mine, and she's on All Things Considered. So I would say she's fun. Michelle Martin, this isn't gossip, but Michelle Martin has, Michelle Martin and Audie both really reached out to me of their own accord when I came in, and really just encouraged me, said, hey, come here, how you doing? Really sat me down and have always been so kind to me. So I can say that genuinely, behind the scenes. Scott Simon loves to talk about his kids. So if you get him anywhere, he's gonna talk about his girls. He has one in college and one is in high school. He's going to talk about his kids a lot, and we're always talking about it. And I have 3 kids, so we're always talking about our kids together. So it's both of us. So a lot of our our banter is about that. I'm trying to think who else. I think everybody has their own little. Scott Horsley is great. He can be really funny. He has I think people wouldn't think Scott Horsley would have the sense of humor that he has, but he does. Yeah, he has a great sense of humor. Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't have nothing bad to say about nothing. Not on camera or nothing like that. But no, I really don't have anything bad to say about anybody. Yeah, I think it's a lot of. I think there are a lot of people at NPR that work really hard, and they're really the people that you see. The people that you see or hear on the radio. That's a lot of what you get. So they're really good people. Yeah.
Thought I was going to have to save you there. Sorry. My name's Leonora, and I grew up in Montreal in a bicultural family. My mother's from Mexico, and we would go back and forth to Mexico City as a kid, and I went to school there. And when, so I'm used to being constantly a bridge, culturally, nationally, everything. So I've been in Vermont now for 23 years, and decided to become an elected official for my community. And I guess I want to ask, as a woman of color, how you handle being the bridge between having power, having a voice, and knowing that there are so many others that don't, and that balancing being patient and understanding that wheels turn slowly and being a team player versus handling that impatience, that the knowing how much people are hurting. When you bring up a topic that no one in the room will relate to, and they might be like, well, we just don't want to cover that. Yeah. Have you had moments like that, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that I do always try to keep in mind that there's so many people who are not in the position that I am. So I'm blessed to be in a position where I can have a voice and I can, make myself heard. I always try to be cognizant that I don't speak for everyone, like even people that look like me or whatever, that I always, I can only speak from my experience. But I do think it's important, even in those moments where it feels like, should I say this? Like, I always try to remember, like, especially being in the White House press pool, there were times where I would be the only one who would ask about Black unemployment and say, okay, yeah, you're saying Black unemployment is the best it's ever been, but it's still double white unemployment. And I would have to ask that question. And sometimes I would think, do I want to be the one to ask that question? Why don't, I got to ask the Black question. But then I'm like, well, if I don't ask it, it's not going to get asked. And so I really had to say, look, if I'm going to be in this space, let me at least, do something that could be worthwhile, and let me at least be a voice that they may not hear. And so even though it can feel like this added burden, like, why do I have to be the one to ask about this? Because Black people are people and they're Americans like everybody else, and this wouldn't be acceptable for, for the white population to have unemployment this high. But I felt like I would lean towards asking the question, because it's better to have the question asked than to not have it asked at all, even if it felt unfair that I had to be the one. But if I have to be the one, I'll be the one. And that's the way I kind of felt. Yeah. Hi.
One question that I had you sort of touched on this earlier, where reporters like you might be expecting a certain development to happen in a story or one certain thing to happen as you've been covering it for a while, and then like something completely different, like the opposite of that thing happens, and you have to like deal with that change in the story very quickly. How do reporters deal with that, with journalists deal with stuff like that? I'm expecting something like that to happen quickly.
When stuff like that happens, you hear a lot of foul language from people. You hear a lot of stressful, people get very stressed out. But that's a very good question. As a journalist, I will say it humbles you because you think you know, but you have no idea. And sometimes things will surprise you. And so I think that's part of being a journalist, is being able to adjust and to say, okay, throw that out. We're doing something totally different. Let me try to think on my feet. Okay, what would I ask in this situation now? This is not what I expected, but this is what we got. And so what do people need to know now? And sometimes it's just basic, like who, what, when, where, and why. Just like, okay, so what's going on? Who is it going to impact? How did this happen? And just start trying to get those answers. And it sounds like really basic, but it's really I mean, it's really what we do. Like, even in complicated situations, you really just start off by going like, okay, so tell me what happened. Okay, so what might be the impact of this? Like, you know, that's kind of what you start doing. But yeah, it's very stressful, and I think, like I said, it's humbling, because if you try to make some predictions and you see, we were wrong about that. Like, so I think you learn very quickly to kind of get out of the prediction business, because you don't know what's gonna happen. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Scarlett. I'm a high schooler in Vermont, and I'm wondering what's one of the most impactful interviews you've had and why?
So for my civil rights generation, for that series, like those interviews that I did are some of the most, the ones that I think will always stay with me. Joanne Bland was one of the youngest people that marched on Bloody Sunday in Selma on the bridge, and you know, her going down to Selma and you know, having her talk about what she went through will always stay with me. She talked about, I mean, I think then she was around 12 when she was on that bridge. She was not personally beaten, but they chased them off the bridge. And she remembers running with her sister, basically running for their lives, and they ran past their home and they ran to a church. And she thought that the men would not come into the church, but they did, and they beat people in the church. And I did not realize that. I did not realize that the beating did not stay on that bridge, that they actually did go, you know, chase them throughout the town, including going into a church and throwing people into the baptismal pool and breaking arms and doing all these things. I mean, it was shocking. And she talked about how they, you know, at other marches, they would be chased throughout, they would chase them and run them all day. I mean, it was just, I mean, it is so, and Joanne is now just in her 60s. And so to talk to her and to hear her story, it will always stay with me. And, you know, I talked to the cousin of Emmett Till, Reverend Wheeler Parker. He's the last living witness of the kidnapping of Emmett Till, and how the white men came in that night and he thought he was going to die. He was just a child himself, and he thought he was dead, and he thought, you know, he was just like, I'm gonna die. And so those stories will always stay with me. I also got to tell the story of my mother and my uncle and them going through what they went through in Oxford, North Carolina in 1970 and you know, marches and segregation and all of that. So those stories will always stay with me. So that's some of the work that I've done that I'm really proud of.
Ayesha, I'm Allison. I teach journalism right down the road
Oh,
at
wow.
St. Michael's
That's great.
College, and several students are here in the audience.
Yeah.
Watching not only the face and the voice and the tone of journalism change a bit over the years, every time I talk with my students, I get a lot of hope about the future and the evolution of where it's going. But if you could talk with them about what you see 5 years hence, what will be the face and the voice of journalism then? You know, we'll still be rooted in the pursuit of truth, but how do you see it changing?
Sorry, before you answer that, I think this is the last question that we have time for, so thank you to everybody who had other questions. Hopefully you'll have a chance to potentially ask afterwards.
Yes,
but
yes,
what a great
please,
place
please.
to end on, a look to the future.
You know, I think I will say that it's hard for me to say what journalism will look like because I couldn't have predicted where journalism is now and the things that would happen now. I think that what you are seeing is, you know, I'm hoping that younger people will come up and that they will have their own ideas and that they will put their own stamp on journalism and push it to be more representative of the world around us, to push back on some of the predominant ideas that are often go unquestioned and unchecked, and that that journalism will be, a way of really reaching out to people who feel so disaffected right now. Now that sounds very Pollyanna-ish, but what I think and what I hope is that each and every single one of us can just do the best we can with what we got and just try to make journalism in the world a little bit better. So if that means supporting journalism that you feel is good and worthwhile, then do that. If you are a journalist, just being the best journalist you can be, whether you're like on a stage like I am, or you're just kind of in the trenches, just doing work that maybe doesn't get that attention. Because that's what I realize now, is that for many, many years, I was not on anyone's stage. I wasn't doing anything like this. No one would come in to see me, but I was doing the work. And that work that I did laid the foundation for what I do now. So it is important to just do the work to the best of your ability, and it will pay off in ways that you couldn't imagine. So that's the only thing that I can hope for journalism. So I hope it gets better. I hope it gets more representative. That's what my hope is.
Ayesha Rascoe.
Thank you so much. And buy the book. You can pre-order, get your thing. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh my goodness, I don't understand. Thank you so much. Oh wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.